Al, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. And I also have to say that, you've been super helpful with a bunch of ideas and insights as we continue down this path with really sort of acting as product marketers in a large way. I've said, multiple times as I've been a student of product marketing over the last, you know, couple years, certainly on this venture over the last year and change. And I've said that like founders really dig in very similar ways as product marketers do. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge your help and really thank you for everything you've done for us so far.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, yeah, sort of a shameless plug, but for you guys for Asset Mule, I think it really solves something that I've really been challenged by over the course of my career as a product marketer. And it's interesting. We can measure almost everything in marketing in terms of our actual output. Whether it's an event or a webinar, how many leads, if it's on the digital team, how much traffic. But as product marketers, it's really hard for us to measure our actual results. We can certainly talk about the inputs, how many white papers did we write? But in terms of the output, what it actually did, it's really hard. And so I'm excited, in our conversations, how you guys are really leaning into this problem and tackling it. Because I think it's a big problem. Every product marketing organization in the world has this problem. So I really wish you guys well, and I'm excited for where you guys are going to go.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much. I'll send you a Venmo for that one after. But just for the folks out there, Al is currently the head of product marketing at ArangoDB, but you've been a long time head of product marketing, VP of product marketing. I mean, you've just been really, immersed in this function for a long time. And as I've been, again, sort of researching and being a student of this practice, I've realized that product marketers who have been in it, certainly in leadership roles for a while, is a very unique situation. So, one of the companies that I really admired a lot is New Relic, and amongst other ones, One Login. I mean, you've really worked at the prominent brands in our space. So just for the folks out there, definitely check out Al on LinkedIn, follow him. And there's just a ton of insights that he shares. But why don't we dive into the questions that I wanted to ask you today? To, if you were to think about the best way, right? If you're a new leader who's going to be coming into an organization and having to take over an existing team, right? What are the best ways to do that? And I know there are a lot of different layers, but maybe we can start off at a high level and then we can dig into some of the details like structuring, is it by product, by industry, by function, those sort of things.
Yeah, you bet. So I guess when I've taken over an existing team as a product marketing leader, what I try to do is I try to look for what jobs are to be done, who is the best person to do each of those jobs, and how can they be developed to do those jobs better. And I think, sorry to throw out it's probably cliche to throw out sports analogies, but to throw out a sports analogy, with a football team, you have doing the job of a quarterback is different than doing the job of a linebacker and a wide receiver and a kicker. It's also interesting that football teams have I've learned recently, football teams have a different person for doing the punting versus the kicking a field goal versus the kind of kickoff. And the thing is that it's the same way with product marketers. Some people might be more outgoing, better, more engaging with the sales team. Some people might be more analytical, and maybe they're better at digging into numbers and figuring out from behaviorally, looking at our different blog posts, which positions resonating and which ones not. And so, I think that's really the key thing is try to find the best people for each individual role. Sometimes things need to get restructured a bit. And also to do your job, I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but how can you develop people to do their roles better? And so that's really kind of what I'm looking to do. So to implement that, what I'll do is I'll meet individually with everybody, talk about what they like and dislike about their role, what they find easy, what they find hard. I'll keep these discussions confidential, not sharing them with HR. And this gives me insight in terms of how maybe to restructure the team, how to reorganize the team. I'll also, of course, it's always good to look at to do secondary research as a product marketer. And on that note, it's always good to also meet with HR, look at their recent reviews, performance reviews, and then kind of merge those insights of the primary research, talking with people, the PMMs, and the HR, and then kind of merge those together to try to figure out who should be doing what in the roles in the team.
And you talk about the HR piece, and for the folks out there who are maybe listening to that and going, okay, but why do I do that? Maybe we can unpack that a little bit because of the human component, right? When you're able to, my understanding is, when you're able to actually have that conversation and develop that trust with that individual and say, hey, I'm not sharing this. This is between us. There's a different kind of level of feedback they're able to provide.
Absolutely. I think it is really important to get that trust, to build that new trust as a leader. And I think it's also important to talk to your product marketers about where they want to go in their career. Maybe someone wants to go into a sales role. Maybe they want to go into sales engineering. Maybe another person wants to go into growth marketing and check that out. And try to figure out which direction that is, because I think that can also, someone's going to be more motivated to do that role that's kind of in line with the career track that they want to choose and pursue. And so, I think it's really about finding those areas where people are motivated to excel. And then, of course, where there are gaps, then you have a case for adding new headcount.
In terms of structuring the team, I know you, as we've talked about and we were sharing notes, you tended to want to focus, with some exceptions, on structuring these teams by product. Maybe we can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So my sort of working assumption is to structure the product marketers by product. And of course, definitely can be exceptions. But the reason is that a product marketer has to eat, sleep, and breathe the value proposition, and to really know it intrinsically and to be able to express it, in an elastic fashion. Meaning, they should be able to express it in a short tweet, or a 3,000 word blog post, or a tagline going on to a booth, that's being used at a conference. And the only way you can do that is to really just kind of immerse yourself, to sort of marinate yourself in that value prop, what the customers are saying about this product, how the salespeople are discussing the product, what the competitors are doing and saying about you. It's almost like with acting, there's sort of method acting, and where people just kind of step into that role and never get out of character. That's sort of a little bit how I think, if you're a product marketer, if you're really doing a good job, to just really deeply know everything about that. The good thing is that when you go and you talk to executives, when you're a product marketer and you do get those meetings with the executives, you're making a proposal, and they should be able to turn to you, and you are the expert on that product and its positioning, and how it exists in the market. And so, that's sort of my initial working hypothesis. However, with every rule, there's an exception. And so sometimes it might make sense to look into other ways of splitting up the team. So for instance, you might make sense to overlay an industry perspective, right? So if somebody is going into a highly regulated industry like healthcare or financial services, it might make sense for someone who really understands HIPAA and how your product integrates with it, or various financial regulations and how your product interacts with those. Then that might make sense. One thing I would sort of the counterexample, or the anti-pattern, if you will, that you don't want to do, I think, is I've seen it where you break out competitive separately into a separate group, and what happens is you almost get sort of this ivory tower approach, where you get these long, deep, competitive analyses that no one reads, that the product marketing team doesn't really use. It's not really practical. So I'd recommend against doing that. But yeah, product first, then maybe industry, maybe geo as well. There are certain geographies where the buying patterns might be quite different. Those are sort of the ways that I look at splitting up the team and organizing the team.
Awesome. I know you mentioned, kind of what you would do early on while embarking on this new journey, taking over an existing team. Maybe we can double click into two sort of different experiences. The first one is that first week. So if
Hmm.
I'm sitting here as a potential leader going to take over a team and I wanted to figure out what does that first week look like, maybe we can dive into
Yeah.
that. And then secondly, what does that first 90 days look like? And as executives, we're always asking others, hey, give me a 90-day plan, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is that product marketing is an incredibly connective role. And so, your first week, your first month even should really reflect that. How is it connective? I mean, you're basically connecting um, what's being done on the product development side, product management, engineering, with the go-to-market side, sales, the marketing team, the support team, and then of course customers, and then also executives. So because it's probably the most highly connective role, one of the most highly connective roles in the organization, that and of course product management. Um, and so what I'll ask my group team members to do is to when they join, is to really meet very much with all the different people that they'll be interacting with. So meet with their counterpart in product management, meet with their counterpart in engineering, sales leaders of various account teams. Like, so for instance, you have them meet, typically you'll have your standout salespeople who are the top people in terms of hitting their number, hitting their quota. Whatever they're doing as a product marketer, you want to make sure you can tap into that really well, because they've probably developed really good messaging. And so part of your job as a product marketer is to take these best from your top performing salespeople and then spread them out to the rest of the organization. So if you can bring, your bottom 20% and bring them up to, median range, that's a great job. That, if you can do that as a product marketer. Who else do you want to meet with? You definitely want to meet with top people in sales engineering, both the leaders and the top performers in sales engineering. Again, they might have really good ideas on positioning. Head of your SDR team, customer support leaders, and of course, all the different various marketing folks that you'll be working with and engaging with. So it's a lot of meetings. Literally, what we'll do is we'll set up a Google Sheet, and I'll sort of list everybody out. This is who, schedule meetings with these people, and then tell me when the meeting's scheduled for, and when it's been completed. It's almost like a project management tool. You could use whatever project management tool you want. But the point is that we'll easily have, 30, 40, 50 rows in that. It's a lot of meetings. So it go beyond the first week. It definitely goes into the first month, and before kind of the crush of a lot of assignments come in, definitely want to have those meetings happen, because you do sort of have this honeymoon period where you have time to do those meetings. That, in addition to learning the product, looking at different sales calls, looking at your top accounts, digging into the Salesforce, the Gong, looking at the various assets that are out there, the corporate deck, the lead nurturing flows, all those things you want to look at. But that's kind of like, I see that as kind of filling the gaps. You'll kind of always have that information available. The thing that's really important to do is to make those connections first in the first month. And so I think so that's sort of how I see the first month. Let me pause there and see if you have any questions or comments
Yeah,
on that.
no, I actually did have a quick question around the attributes from a product marketing leader perspective, and you've worked with so many different go to market professionals. Are there any sort of attributes that those top performers, right? You mentioned meeting with those stakeholders within the sales team. Are there any specific attributes that those stakeholders have that is just consistent across the board at every organization that
Mhm.
you've worked with?
Yeah, one thing that I'll do, this is an interview question I always ask in my interviews with people, is how do you, in about 3 minutes, and we will time, we will be on a stopwatch, take a product for which you've been a product marketer and tell me exactly one persona that you're zeroing in on, and talk about one pain point that product solves for that persona, one feature or capability that addresses that pain point, and then one benefit that accrues out of that. And if you want to sort of split that up into technical versus business pain points, extra credit, and then technical versus business benefits, even better. But do all that in 3 minutes. And that is something where if people can sort of think in that really structured way, they're going to be a good product marketer, because they can, again, we talk about being able to elastically position, if you have 100 characters to put onto, or 50 characters to put on a trade show booth, or a 3,000 word blog post talking about your new launch, you always kind of need to have that value prop as that North Star. And consistently, people who nail that are able to do really well in product marketing. And the other thing, it's surprising how few people really do that prep and nail that. I'll have, there's been hiring periods where it's been really rough and we haven't found good candidates. And I'll tell the recruiters, like, this is exactly what I'm going to be asking for. Please prep on this. And some people do and some people don't. But it really is making sure that people just so really crystallize that value prop in a structured way, and then can use that as the sort of the core of everything else that they do and produce, write, slides, whatever, that needs to be at the forefront of everything that's done. And so I think that's really what separates out a lot of good product marketers.
Awesome. Well, if we were to now think about that 90-day plan, right? You've spent,
Mhm.
let's say, the first month, maybe a little more, meeting with all those stakeholders that you mentioned, digging into the product, you're
Mhm.
educating yourself around the organization, and now you have some data and you're trying to figure out, what do I start to work on, moving forward, at least in the short term. What does that first 90 days look like?
Yeah, I think so. The first thing is getting really crisp on roles. And so I find the RACI framework is really helpful for that. So that's RACI, stands for responsible, so who does the work; accountable, who delegates the work; who's consulted for their input; and who's merely kept informed but not providing input back. If they want to, that's fine, but you're not counting on it. You're not waiting up for them. Um, and I think sort of nailing down those processes is really key. So, for instance, with product management, sometimes someone comes in and maybe product management has sort of been filling in for the product marketing role, and so they might be saying, "Okay, what's this person going to be doing?" And so, it might be really important to sit with your product manager and say, "Look, you own the product roadmap. In RACI terms, you are responsible for that. I certainly, to do my job, I need to be informed of the product roadmap. Otherwise, we can't do launches. I would love to be consultant on it because I'd love to help, because I'm talking to a lot of customers. I'm looking at the competition, and I can certainly add value there. So that's an example. Or, for instance, other people within the marketing team, also really helpful. And then also in terms of when you start talking to the sales team, like, look, I'm responsible. You might tell the different sales leaders, I'm responsible for the positioning, but certainly want you to be consulted. And indeed, who on your team should be consultant on this? Who would you like to, who do you think is really effective and should provide input on this? And so I think, so nailing down those processes and cadences, I think is really key. So one cadence I think is really helpful is a launch cadence, and launches can be anything from a single tweet, or it could be everything to main CEOs on main stage, Steve Jobs style. Usually it's somewhere in between. But what we've done in a lot of companies, especially as we've moved to the cloud and we can release more quickly, typically we're doing launches every 2 to 4 weeks. You start coming out with some new feature, some new announcement, et cetera. And so So part of that is getting that launch cadence planning going, where you'll have representatives from product management, engineering, sales, someone in marketing, and you can say, okay, these sort of there's a lot of sort of raw stuff coming out of the product management engineering pipeline. How do we kind of package that up intelligently along some theme? Maybe it's aligned with external factors, like that we're going to a conference or there's some competitive pressure. Maybe it's the start of the quarter, maybe it's the end of the year. How do we kind of plan coherently for these launches? So that's one kind of key cadence to set up, for example. And then I think another key thing is to look at getting those first wins, because it's really important to get that credibility with the team. So for instance, if there's quite often there might be some really urgent fire that needs to get fought and put out, and so get that done, nail it, so you get that credibility, especially whether it's with the product management team, with the sales team. You want them to see you as someone who's effective, who's a good team player, can get stuff done. So first wins, setting up meeting cadences, and then also, of course, getting up to speed with the product itself and what existing artifacts there are out there.
I asked you a question and I really appreciated as we were prepping, your response to it around, making tough personnel decisions without destroying
Mm.
morale. And, I don't think anyone likes to, I don't want to say maybe that in totality. There may be some type of individuals out there that enjoy letting people go and all that for whatever reason. But I think the majority of us don't enjoy that, right? But I think like there may be an issue with understanding how to actually approach it. And depending on the sort of composition of that individual, of that leader, of that manager, it will affect the way that they actually approach it. And so I wanted to kind of dive into that, because I know you had mentioned like, hey, it's really about being a great manager and is actually about managing and coaching and helping these individuals maybe that haven't performed well historically or in the short term. And now you're this new leader coming in and having to really figure this thing out. And unfortunately, a lot of people default to, let's just let the people go and hire new people. But that's not always the best answer, right? And I would
Mhm.
argue a lot of the time, with some exceptions, it's probably better to coach those existing folks up, get them going again. They have a history with the organization. They know what the intricacies are versus starting from scratch.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer that a manager needs to manage, and part of it is just involvement in sports. You see where people um, they might not be able to do a particular maneuver or action particularly well, but you coach them on it, they get better, and then they're doing it. As a parent, I've seen that too. Your kids start out not able to ski down a hill, and then pretty soon they're parallel turning and doing a great job. And I think that, and I say that because I think with product marketing and a lot of jobs, it is definitely possible to coach and help people get better. So, for example, once I was managing someone who was responsible for customer marketing, getting case studies. The problem was he wasn't getting any case studies. He wasn't delivering, and he was in this really catch-22 because the sales team didn't want to engage him and introduce him to any customers who could do a case study, because they saw him as, okay, well, this guy's just a black hole. He doesn't do anything. And of course, he would reach out to salespeople. He was kind of timid, and so he didn't want to. He'd ask them once and not really pursue anything. So the easy thing would be, okay, he's ineffective. Let me let him go. But the thing is that it said, like, look, let's dig into this. Let's figure this out. We looked at the pipeline of customer case studies. We found that there were several that he had kind of inherited from his predecessor that they're on the finish line. They're like, look, you just need to maybe get an approval email, maybe put a timeline on it. If the customer doesn't get back to you within a couple weeks, then just publish it. And if they do come back to us, we'll have a paper trail. Just let's move it. And worst case, they'll say, take it down. We'll take it down. But more than likely, they're just probably apathetic and they don't care. Let's publish it. So, or maybe we needed one more quote from the salesperson or just whatever. So we got like those 5 or so things over the finish line. And then, and this is really important, is, you're always selling yourself as a product marketer and your work. So in our weekly sales call, we said, hey, we got, 2 new case studies. Okay, great. Next week, we got 2 more case studies. Okay, we got another case study. And then we also said, hey, look, we've got these case studies done. We want more case studies. Like, things are moving here. Don't just assume that, let's help us help you, right? So more introductions started happening. And the guy was kind of timid. That's how one of the sales directors described him. I said, like, look, get in there. Like, you got to be less timid. Just get out there and ask. Salespeople ask all the time for customers to sign checks. They're okay with you asking. They're okay with, customers are always making demands on them. You are not going to offend them by making a request. So he got out of that mold. He started doing it, started getting more of these, started securing more meetings. And again, every time he was doing stuff, every time he made forward progress, talk about it on the weekly sales call. We publish the pipeline. So I was holding him accountable, but then also, who is the account exec for each of those accounts? Like, this guy's going to be reaching out to you soon. So make sure you respond. So we're holding the account execs accountable. We're holding the customer marketing guy responsible. And we broke that log jam and we started getting these customer case studies out. He got a good cadence. And it was just simply digging in as a manager and just zeroing in and not taking sort of the easy road out, which is, okay, let them go and just let HR kind of, roll with the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
But actually doing your job and managing.
What about burnout? We've talked a lot about a lot of tactical things and things like that, as a space and certainly a lot of best practices that people talk a lot about, again, those tactical things. But what about when you're dealing with a team that's maybe didn't have the best leader beforehand? You've now come in and taken it over, taking that team over, and frankly, some or maybe all of the folks are a bit burned out. How do you sort of approach that?
Yeah, I think one thing is to, well, first understand that what might have been the right situation for one point in a company's stage of growth might not be the best model for its current state of growth. And so once I came into a product marketing team, where everyone was doing an amazing job, the company is a household name in its industry, but they were all burned out, and they were the right size team probably for 2 or 3 years prior when they were all hired, but they're being paid half the market rate, which probably was a function of the fact that the company was just a fledgling startup at the time and hadn't gotten sort of its follow-on funding. And the company had since in those 3 years had really massively increased the size of its product line. So you had product marketers who were spread across multiple products. So they hadn't grown the team to accommodate the growth in the product line. So they were overworked, they were underpaid, and they were burned out. So what do I do? First thing is saw the salaries, met with HR. It was very obvious they were being underpaid. Met with HR, showed them the current salaries, got the salary, got raises for all of them within about a month. Didn't get as much as we wanted, but we were certainly in a step in the right direction. So they started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like, okay, you have a manager who is looking out for you, looking out for your best interests. The next thing was to get a headcount for the team and just say, like, look, we've got about 7 different products. We have 3 product marketers. We need 4 more heads at least, maybe more. So let's do that. So got the headcount, started hiring to that headcount, and started to do a lot of aggressive hiring for that point. So at the end of it, people were being paid more money over this original team and not having to work nights and weekends. And so, they're able to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel and get really to a sustainable level of work and a sustainable level of compensation.
If you think about the marketing goals, some might call them, the OKRs, others have different frameworks. But if you think about those that the C-suite really cares a lot about, any recommendations on a framework that you really stand behind?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I'd look at the C-suite is typically you have the two that really care about product marketing are the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and CRO, or Head of Revenue, Head of Sales. Um, CEO sometimes, but I think in general, in terms of it's really important to sort of zero in on those two, the CMO and the CRO. And I think it's important to have make sure the product marketing to make sure that these two individuals, these understand that marketing needs to be held accountable for what it controls and not for what it is cannot control. So it might sound obvious, but it is an important distinction because a lot of times people say, well, the product marketing's job is to maximize revenue. And it is, but there are many things that might influence that revenue. A company might have a great quarter. You might have a rock star salesperson. You might get lucky with, some big deal that comes through. And so sure, product marketers always like say, yeah, my bookings were this, and isn't this great? And yeah, that's nice, but it's kind of a vanity metric. So I like to look at more granular measures that are within a product marketer's control and make sure that and get agreement with the CMO and the CRO that these are the things that they need to be held accountable for. Um, and so for the CMO, I like to really kind of step back and say, as a product marketer, I keep in mind there's two work streams. There's the launch work stream where new capabilities are coming out. Okay, we launch it. And then there's also the evergreen, which is like back to New Relic. It got its start in application performance monitoring. And even though we were coming out with monitoring web applications and mobile applications and analytics, the bulk of our revenue is still application performance monitoring. And it was important to make sure that that's what we call the evergreen work stream, right? And so a lot of times if you're just doing launch, your evergreen stuff will kind of get stale. It might need to get updated because stuff that really was useful, a really differentiator, no longer is, or maybe there's new competitors who are hammering on you for some way that you need to respond to. So launch workstream and evergreen workstream. And then so the question is how a product marketer needs to be held accountable for their deliverables in both of those work streams. And so, you're going to want to make sure that, so how are you held accountable? I think it's important to look for the activities that they're doing. So for instance, because those are the things that are most under the product marketer's control. So for instance, if it might be a newer product, maybe they need to do, a launch every 2 weeks. And so that means 6 launches a quarter, or excuse me, wait, hang on. Yeah, 6 launches a quarter. On the other hand, if it's a product that is, been kind of in this launch mode, maybe needs to have the evergreen stuff rejuvenated. Okay, then let's say we need to work on other assets, right? Maybe the customer deck for that, maybe a white paper for that, maybe data sheets, what have you, or lead nurturing flows that kind of get back to the evergreen aspect, that rejuvenate the evergreen aspect of that product. The deliverables for that team needs to be clearly set forth, and then it needs to be put through the lens of evergreen versus launch and what's appropriate for the product situation. With the CRO, I think actually it's interesting, even though that's kind of more of a dotted line for product marketers, that's actually in some ways is more measurable. And the reason is that one key practice that needs to be done, I think, for product marketers is to do regular sales enablement sessions. One thing I like is to have during the weekly sales meeting, maybe all sales if it's a smaller sales team, or maybe by region or geo if you have larger teams. Whatever it is, you got to do. They typically have a weekly team meeting. Get in there, get a slot. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 10, 15 minutes, but present and do some enablement. Short, frequent sessions work better. Now, the thing is you want to send out a survey after each one of those sessions and just say, and just simple survey, it could be Google surveys or something like that. And it could be a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. How did we do in this session? And then what did you like? What did you dislike? And then what you have as a result of that is you have a set of rankings in terms of how you performed for the sales team. And we would have things like, for instance, at one company I worked at, we started off with our sessions, we're getting about a 3.5, and then we got up to about a 4.2 on a scale of 1 to 5. That was a good thing. We're able to talk to, we're able to show that we're making steady progress. And of course, we have, qualitative. We can pick out, what are some of the themes and the feedback. And so I think that's a really key thing to be able to do in terms of the reporting up to the CRO. And so you can have, if you translate those to OKRs, it might be, okay, get, average, score currently is at 4.0. Let's try to get that to a 4.2. So it's a pretty clear OKR that you can do for the CRO if you adopt that practice.
I was going to ask you about effectiveness, but I think some of those kind of elements you just spoke to right now will help you determine effectiveness. But anything else that you wanted to kind of highlight around like that, general idea of like how you can better determine product marketing effectiveness?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to the extent you can always manage product marketing work products. I always try to do so. So, for instance, I always like as much as possible for the product marketing team to deliver its work in the form of web pages. So you can use traffic as a measure of effectiveness, and then other things that your digital team might use, like how much do people scroll down the page, and so if you're doing a launch blog post, right, that's a pretty clear thing to be able to do. That okay, we launched this out here, we did the launch blog post. How many people are hitting the post? How many people are scrolling down all the way to the bottom? How many people are looking at the demo video? How many people, how much engagement have we had with the social media posts related to that launch? And sometimes some stuff will be really exciting and some stuff won't. I mean, if you get SOC 2 or GDPR compliance, you're not going to see a lot of people doing backflips around that because people don't tend to get excited about compliance, but it is important for winning deals. Conversely, if you do anything with at the time we're recording this in 2024, if you do anything around AI, that probably will get a lot of stuff. So you kind of benchmark a little bit for that, but you do try to look at the traffic, and I think also, yeah, you look at the same measures that your digital team will be looking at. It's I think also, and you can do that at other things as well. For instance, if you have a product marketer working at lead nurturing flows. Okay, so what is our conversion rate on these lead nurturing flows? What is the okay, so we have, let's say, a seven step set of marketing emails, and we have one product marketer in charge of this product, and one product marketer in charge of product B, and what is the relative click-through rate on those? And is it the product marketer who's doing it? Is it the product? You always have to kind of tease that out, but clearly, if you're getting like a click-through rate of 0 or close to it, then something's wrong. Something's not working. So I think that's one thing that's really key. Again, things like webinars, right? You can always look at with webinars, how many signups did you get for the webinars, and then also what was the drop-off rate with the webinar? That's, I think, another. It's almost like sort of the equivalent of scrolling to the bottom of the page. If it was really good content or a good webinar, then people will probably stick around to the end. Or how many questions came about at the end of the webinar? And I always ask my product marketers, stick around. If you got to stick around for an hour or two after the webinar answering questions, by all means do it. People are engaged. That's great. So, again, it might be the case that the product is really controversial or the product's really loved. You're always trying to tease it out. Is it the product? Is it the product marketer? But you try to tease these things out and triangulate in as best you can. Of course, we don't have great answers because you're always trying to figure out, I think that the really big problem is in terms of blind spots is connecting to revenue, connecting to deals. And especially when you have these things are PDFs or these blobs of content that are just kind of inanimate, and so this is why I'm, again, plug for Asset Mule. I'm really
Yeah, I was
excited
just
because,
thinking that's what we think a
right,
lot about, right?
that's exactly and so, we've talked a lot about, and this is, of course, is not a commitment to roadmap, but, the possibility of being able to say, like, hey, this particular deck, or this particular slide, was viewed by these accounts for these deals, which brought in these bookings. And so you can start to say that, yeah, it's not just that this product marketer got lucky because their product just happened to have a good deal. It's like, no, they produced this slide deck for the account exec that got viewed, by 50 different people, 300 different times in 4 different time zones, and they pulled in a deal worth $7 million. Yeah, I think we should probably give the product marketer some credit for this deal, right? So that's the kind of scenario I'd love to. That's the kind of situation I'd love to see Asset Mule get to,
Yeah.
and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the attribution piece and tying to revenue and impact is the holy grail, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
we're definitely keen on that. I wanted to shift gears
yeah,
a bit to talk a little bit about the career path of a product marketer. And I've been seeing a lot of content on LinkedIn lately, and it's sort of been varying in terms of folks' opinion. But one of the ones that I saw recently was, is product marketing a new potential path to executive leadership, right? And so wanted to get your take on that concept. But at a whole, what is the sort of the path that you've seen, and how do you keep product marketers motivated and inspired, especially when they're digging into a lot of different things? And what I've experienced throughout my research is that the jobs to be done might vary based on what the company objectives are, sales objectives, CS, and so on. There's like this, like at times it seems, at least, there's this dependency on what are the other departments wanting to focus on now, and now I have to kind of shift gears to be able to help support those things.
yeah. I guess I would say with product marketing, if you were the way you could think of it is, if you're an individual product marketer, is you can kind of go sort of straight up, or spiral up, or kind of off in to the left or right. So what do I mean by that? This sort of the straight up mode, just to explain each of those motions, the straight up mode would be to say, okay, I'm going to go through increasingly higher and higher levels of responsibility around product marketing. Eventually, it might be head of product marketing, senior director, VP of product marketing, and then make that leap to VP of marketing or CMO, leveraging upon my skills in all the things product marketing does, positioning and messaging and competitive and all that. And then hiring, strong as a CMO, hiring strong lieutenants who can handle the other things like the digital, the demand gen, and so forth. And then from there, some CMOs come on to be CEOs. So yes, that is a path that can be done. There's what I call the spiral up way, which is you might say, look, I want to structure my career where I'm sort of spending some time in product marketing, and then I'll do other parts of marketing before I try to go for that CMO type role. So I really understand that. So I might do some work in demand gen, might do some work in digital, and eventually, jump into the CMO role. Another thing which is interesting, which is kind of sort of a hybrid of those two, is what you could call the product marketing plus plus. And what I mean by that is where you rise up in product marketing, and then you take on things that are more messaging oriented and less on the sort of operational side. So what I mean by that is, you rise up, and maybe you're a director of product marketing, but you're also in charge of PR. You're in charge of content marketing, which of course is really like a natural fit. I mean, a lot of times the distinction between product marketing and content marketing is pretty, pretty blurry. You might take on analyst relations. You might even take on website and digital. You could leverage a strong, web development team, and you're really applying your positioning skills that you got as a product manager to the digital side. And so you kind of you get that sort of increasing sphere of responsibility. So that way, when you do go into the head of marketing role, sure, you need to find people who are good at events and conferences and demand gen and so forth, and maybe marketing analytics, strong lieutenants there, but you've already kind of been responsible for like half the marketing team. So that's sort of the upward, sort of the up straight up or the spiral up type of modes. Then there's sort of the left or right. And what I mean by that is I've seen product marketers who really, they say, okay, this is great, but I really want to be more responsible for the product side and actually shaping the product itself and not the positioning. And that's great. And so they'll make that jump over from product marketing to product management. And then they kind of rise up through product management. And indeed, there's plenty of product managers who eventually become CEOs. So that's a pretty high level. And there's some who really enjoy the sales side. And so they might, make that leap from product marketing to account exec or to sales engineer. And the sales engineer side might often work well because it is a very analytical part of the sales process. You need to really know the product well. If you're a technical product marketer, then the sales engineering role might be pretty comfortable for you. If you're much more about working with the customers and being less technical, then maybe the account exec role. And then of course you rise up and again, there are many CEOs who have kind of come up through the sales ranks. So there really are a wide ranges that you can do. One example, I think, just to put a point to this, is sort of what I would call sort of the straight up role. The first mode is a former boss of mine, Dave McJanet. He did product marketing at VMware. Then from there, he became VP of marketing at Horse. And then later from there became CEO, where he still is CEO at HashiCorp. And again, it was always, I think the common thread in that case was that the group that Dave and I were working on at VMware was what we call the Spring division or Spring Source division, which is where we were taking an open source Java development framework and then commercializing it. So selling support around it, cloud services, things like that. And so Hortonworks was kind of the same play, taking open source Hadoop projects and then commercializing those. And then HashiCorp is similar. It's taking open source projects and then figuring out ways to thoughtfully commercialize them. So I think the point there is that as you kind of rise up, even though the roles might be different, sometimes look for commonalities in the types of companies. So for instance, if someone was a product marketer at an analytics company, maybe as they're rising up through the role, they're doing different roles, but they're always sort of focused on analytics. And that could be AI or databases or developer tools, what have you.
Al, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing all this wisdom really across the gamut, right? From building teams to taking over teams to OKRs and goals to dealing with the human elements of this whole leadership within product marketing. If folks wanted to, let's say, follow you on social media, learn more from you, what are the best channels to reach you?
Yeah, so I'm Al Sargent, all one word, on LinkedIn. So ALSARGENT. And you can also find me on my Linktree as well. Same thing, Al Sargent on Linktree.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for all your support and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.